Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Justice Talks. Whether you're watching now or watching later, let me tell you a little bit about what Justice Talks is if you haven't been with us before. You're watching us, which is a monthly live interview series hosted by me, Dr. Liz Rios, where people who are on the front lines fighting and advocating or educating for justice or the development of people and the church are highlighted. What I want you to do basically when you watch this show is I want you to read. I want you to read, pick up a book, but I also want you to purchase the book that I'm talking about. So, friends, if you're watching now, later, and you've always had questions about calling, I mean, who hasn't, and maybe never got real answers, this is the conversation for you. So I'm going to give you some time to tag your friend, to post it on your social media, because I want you to get in on what we're going to be talking about. And if you know someone who's had similar questions, go ahead, remind them. This is on today. This is a great opportunity to talk to someone who has been teaching about calling and vocation for a while now. So don't forget to like, to love, and put comments in the chat if something resonates with you. So we're going to get started. Tonight, I'm interviewing Dr. Susan Maros, who's a professor of Christian leadership at Fuller Theological Seminary, where she teaches courses on leadership and formation. She is the past president of Academy of Religious Leadership and currently the co-chair of the Practical Theology Interest Group in the Society for Pentecostal Studies. So, high five to all the Pentecostals out there. Dr. Maros resides in Altadena, California, which I actually had to look up because I didn't know that it was in California, and two emerging adult children. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Maros. Welcome, Dr. Maros.
Thank you so much.
So here we are. Let me show your book to our audience. So this is the book, Calling in Context, Social Location and Vocational Formation. And again, this is a book that I wish I would have had when I was growing up. How many of us have experienced talking to pastors and leaders, and they're telling us that we have to find our calling? And they're telling us that we have to find our calling, but they really don't tell us how to find our calling. So we go through life kind of, waiting for the big aha, the big sky opening or the violins playing or an angel showing up and telling us this is what you're supposed to do. And so a lot of us, and I still have conversations with friends about this, most people go through life wondering if they missed it, if they missed that assignment. So I'm really glad that this book is out. And it's not too late. It's not too late. Even if you are in your 50s and 60s, this is a really great book, but especially if you're a young person, because it will help you to avoid some of the disconnects that we had growing up. So, Dr. Maros, there was a few things that you mentioned in your introduction that I love. And I want to point those out before I get into the nitty gritty of the conversation. You mentioned that who we are is being formed by God across a lifetime of experience. What we do, how we perceive and engage with God's activity in the world flows out of who we are and who God is making us to be. So when I read that, it resonated with me because I always have felt like there was, like even I missed it, And I understood that really later on in life, maybe in my 30s or something, I started to think, well, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's calling evolves. We grow into it. Things and experiences shape us and form us, and it's really never stagnant. So, what do you say about that? Like, how did you come to that particular sentiment that it's across a lifetime of experience? Is it something that you yourself experienced, your students?
In some ways, it was a combination of things, but I would say the starting point in many ways was the work of J. Robert Clinton, Bobby Clinton, who was a longtime professor of leadership at Fuller. his leadership emergence theory is what exposed me to the notion that God develops leaders across a lifetime. So that's sort of the backbone. And then as I began teaching and I was working with adult learners primarily, so I had some students who were 18, 19, 20-year-olds, but I mostly had, 28, 38, 48, 58-year-olds, 68-year-olds,
Wow.
right?
Oh, look at that.
And people who had been in pastoral ministry for a lot of years, or people who had been serving in their church and now were coming back to school to do a degree, something like that. So I had lots of adult learners, and I'd work with them with Dr. Clinton's materials. But when it came to the calling component, right, there was just this sort of a gap. My students were Pentecostal, and Dr. Clinton comes from a more Reformed context. And so there was a little bit of a gap. But as I worked on that, and as I came to my doctoral research and dove into kind of what's going on, I realized the significance that we develop across a lifetime as leaders, but our calling is part of that development, that our spiritual formation happens across a lifetime. Our discipleship happens across a lifetime. Our intellectual development, our emotional development, our relational development, and our calling. All of that is part and parcel of God's continued formation for us. And it was, the connection of those two things and the investigation of trying to understand those stress points, that I had lots of people in my classroom saying, what's my call? Oh no, I need to know my call. And especially when I knew them and I knew I had been in ministry with them and I saw how fruitful they were, I thought, what in the world is this gap here? Because I see God's gifting in you. I see God's graces in you. So why that hiccup? And this notion that no, life calling is not a moment. There are moments that are involved, but it's not a moment. It's a lifetime journey. Became just really central to my understanding.
And that's so important because, like you, I came to this place where I was like, it has to be like, it didn't, nobody sent me a letter and your book wasn't available at the time or anything like that. But I did, in my spirit, I just felt like calm down. Everything that you've done matters. And I remember my spiritual dad, Reverend Ray Rivera, he would say that we are the sum of all of our experiences.
Yeah.
And that helped me to understand that all of my experiences was forming me to like that next place that God was taking me. And you mentioned in your book that a student had told you, you are called clearly to be a professor. And that you said that my call is the formation of God's people, and that being a professor has been the main role through which I live out that calling. And again, that resonated for me, not because I've had like just one particular role forever. I wish that would have been the case. That's not the case for me, but I do feel that my call has always been to inspire and instruct. I see myself as an educator, and everything that I've been involved in, I'm always trying to educate, however that comes across. And it, again, it hasn't been consistent in the sense of being with one company or being with one role. I've been a professor. I've taught. I've even been in K through 12, school as well. So I kind of hit in those areas. But in the ministry world, I've always had some kind of teacher role. So that resonated for me too, because I felt like, God uses everything, and that is that lifetime of experience. So even if, like in your case, the student like clearly saw, look, you're right in where you're supposed to be. I think people can see that too, that you're right where you're supposed to be, even if they haven't seen a consistency of a particular role. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, for sure. And it's such a big part of our cultural framework of what vocation and calling is, that it has to do with our job or with a role. Like it's a role or a task. And until we figure out that role or task and find the right one, we're not living out our calling. And I think it's more like an internal compass. So your internal compass is about educating people.
Right.
Mine, I phrase it around formation, particularly of leaders. And so it's whatever I do, whatever role I'm in, it affects how I parent, it affects how I'm a neighbor, it affects how I'm a friend, it affects the things I read and care about, so what is that internal compass that whatever role I'm in, that's what I'm doing. I get concerned about the focus on role, because then you get into a job and it's like, is this the one? It has to be. And there's such pressure to, I have to find the right one. And it's like, well, do you? Like, is God limited? Is God in heaven going, oh, I don't know, Dr. Rios chose that job instead of that job. I just don't know what I'm going to do now. How could you possibly live under, we have this sense of somehow we're going to get left behind or overlooked or something, instead of experiencing the presence of God in the circumstances that God has us in, and finding what is that sense of purposefulness that we engage in whatever role we're in.
Right. That is so true. I mean, I used to be a college counselor, and one of the things that would come up a lot, unfortunately, I would feel the pressure of these kids to pick the right college, to pick the right major, to make sure that they were in the right field, especially because they got that pressure from their parents, And it is funny because I have a son that graduated college, and he's always been one of these kids that, he followed, his own path, and, beat his own drum. Like I couldn't tell him to do something even if I wanted to, because he was like, I'm not you, So, and he was very adamant about that. And I think that that's super important for everyone that's listening to understand that, we can take all of our experiences and make, again, maybe being sure of what is that, like, umbrella, that we're under. Like for me, again, it was educating. For you, is, formation, and understanding ourselves a little bit better. Like what brings us joy, what makes us come alive. And we can take some of those things into any role that we have. I feel like I've done that with my roles, and even now in my day job, for some people it's like, why are you doing that? It has nothing to do with what you're about. And I'm like, wow, you don't really connect the dots. It's almost everything of what I do, because I love people. I love making organizations healthy and looking at culture. And so it may be a human resource role, but it's about looking at culture, making sure that people, from the moment that they step into our company to the time that they leave, that they have a great experience. So and using education, the education of staff, education of the new people that come on, to to help them to understand the vision of the company. So I think it's all about perspective. And sometimes we have to come aware of what those perspectives are. And that brings me to another thing that you mentioned in your book. And this is just the intro, guys. Okay, this is not even getting into the meat of the book yet. Okay, so bear with me, because there was just so many good things in here. You mentioned that there was a student, and you mentioned her in your book, Ariana Salazar, and she wrote a poem called "Processing My Past." And I'm going to link that onto the show notes, so that you also are able to see that and understand and have the context for this conversation. And it made me think of all of us, and how we all should be processing our past, right? And she said some things that for you, it was an aha moment. And I want you to just explain a little bit about what that was and how it changed your view about how God created us.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to comment, before we came on, we were talking about this a little bit, but I just want to say how grateful I am that Ariana was willing for me to tell this story and to name her name and to include the link to her poem. That's brave of her. And it's just an honor that she would share her story. She'd be willing to share that. But she was a young leader, very young Latina, super bright, vibrant, just one of these sponges as a learner. And I loved her, worked with her in a student ministry, as well as having her as a student, and thought so well of her. And then I encountered this poem that she wrote. And she talks about the struggle with her identity as a Latina, and how that she experienced that in a variety of settings, but in that is also named, she describes our shared context. The first time I heard the poem, it was really hard. It broke my heart. It was I use that story in the book in part. This is not the only time this kind of thing happened, but this was a very important time. It's a good example of, I had a notion of what my impact was that went with my intentions. I intended to create space for people to thrive, for them to understand who God had made them to be, and to be able to walk into that. And what I heard in her poem is that she felt broken in this space. And it just, I was so saddened, I was so grieved, but it was an important part of the process to realize that there is a gap between my intention and my impact. And if I don't pay attention to that, right, if I just retreat into kind of self-righteous self-justification, well, that was your problem. Why are you getting all upset? Aren't we all equal in God's eyes? Aren't we all human beings? Aren't we all children of God? If I went the kind of colorblind racism route, I wouldn't listen to her story. But listening to her story, as painful as it initially was, became so part of what was so enriching to me, of understanding myself better, understanding God better, understanding our context better, understanding the ways in which my intention to be a blessing, my intention to participate, that we collectively as a group intended to be a blessing, but that's not what was going to be experienced all the time. And to be able to hear her authentic story. And I talk in other places in the book, and I probably don't highlight as much as maybe I should. It's like, take a highlighter and please highlight the times that I talk about the spiritual practice of listening, and how absolutely essential that is for my own formation, for our formation as people, for our formation as God's agents in the world, for our relationships with one another as sisters and brothers in Christ, as fellow human beings on the planet. It's like, can we really listen? Because we're going to discover some things about ourselves, about one another's stories, and ultimately we're going to discover things about who God is.
Yeah, that's what I loved about your story and mentioning it. First of all, it was big of her, but it was also big of you, to be able to ask to put that story in, because most people like to just put the highlight reels, right? Out there, and you realize, that at some point somewhere, there may have been some part that you played in what she said was being broken, and again, it was a time when I saw it, I actually teared up a little bit for both, because I felt like it was brave of her to share what she was sharing, and like I was mentioning to you before we got on, like it was really honest, maybe more honest than I would have put it, and I'm pretty transparent, but it was a story that I think a lot of people could relate to, but the reaction that you had is not something that we normally see, from people that are, in dominant culture. We just don't see it. So that's why I say it's big of you, and I thank you for that, because from that experience, it gave you that opportunity to change perspective, and you talk about it later in the book, about reality, right, and how that is shaped, and there's the main big reality, and then there's the reality that you think there is, that perspective. And I thought that was really important. I was like, wow. And you said that you read a book also right after seeing that poem. And can you share a little bit about what that did to you?
Yeah. So I was on this journey. I was in the process of beginning to discover how important social location is. And I had lived as a missionary kid. I had lived in a neighborhood where I attended a predominantly Black school. I had been in multicultural churches, but I was still a white girl, right? And so, gap between my intention and my impact. And so around about the same time I was listening to her poem, I was coming back from a leadership conference, and a colleague had recommended Emerson and Smith's book, Divided by Faith. So I was reading it on the airplane on my way back, and I had a come to Jesus moment, at 35,000 feet, where I'm sitting in my chair, and I don't care. I'm like sobbing, tears are streaming down my face, because it was it was like a mirror was held up to me about my good intentions as a white evangelical and the assumptions I had made about, even though my church technically could be considered multicultural at the time, still the leadership was white, but I didn't see that, right? I saw the people in the pew. I saw the melanin levels in the pew, and I thought, oh, we're look at us, we look like Revelation 7:9. And that book, how Emerson and Smith describe the views of white evangelicals, I recognized myself. And as they illuminated this space, they focused particularly on white and Black experience. And the way they illuminated that, just it was convicting. It was a come to Jesus moment at 35,000 feet, and I had this sense of how many people have I unintentionally diminished and wounded and disregarded and overlooked and disrespected, all the while thinking I'm a wonderful person. I'm a nice person. I'm a nice white person, and not realizing the assumptions that I was bringing into the situations, the lenses through which I was interpreting experience.
And that's, I think, again, what a lot of people of color, hope for, that there's that realization and that posture of humility when that awareness, becomes like real in a person's life. And sometimes we kind of like see the opposite, right? That justification, that, what are you doing? Or you're so decisive, all these different things that, and so there's some groups that are just like, what, we're not going to even try anymore, and then there's the groups that, they feel called. I believe that that's a special grace for people that feel called to continue that conversation, trying to get people that don't want to listen, but that was a beautiful thing. And so I'm thankful that you had that moment, come to Jesus moment, 35,000 feet in the air, because I think that was a catalyst for your book. And again, the book, for everyone that's watching, is Calling in Context, Social Location and Vocational Formation. And at the end, if you stick around to the end, we're going to be able to give you a special code to get 30% off and free shipping. So that was just a warm-up, guys. That was just a warm-up. So we're going to get now into the nitty-gritty. So tell me, Dr. Maros, what, I ask this of every guest that comes on, like, why did you write this book? What was that driver that said, now is the time for me to birth this book?
Yeah. The impulse for this book at this time really was my sense this is the next faithful step in my own vocational journey, in my own calling journey. Now is the time. This is what faithfulness looks like. And I don't, even at the time when I responded to that, it's like, I don't even know if it's going to get published. I have no idea if anybody's going to read it. I don't know if it's going to be any good, but that's not the point. The point is the response to that sense of, no, this is stewardship. This is the next faithful step. There's also a sense in which the book is, how there are all these people in the Old Testament that would have kind of an encounter with God and they'd build an altar, right? Or they'd set up memorial stones, right? So there's a sense in which the book is a memorial stone. It's saying, up to this point, God has brought me. And this is, it's a love letter in a sense to all of my students, past and present, in a sense, future. Because it's like, here, up to now, this is what I've learned thus far. And this is what I want to say at this moment in time.
And I like that too. I think that's a word for any would-be aspiring authors out there too. Sometimes we're so worried about, is it like a sexy enough topic that people would want to buy this book? Would it be a bestseller, and all that stuff? We have all these things that we put obstacles to get something that God has deposited in us, to get it out into the world. So I think that was a beautiful thing to say for anyone watching that is already feeling the bubbling up of a story or something that they want to get out there, but they're putting out all these other things. Like, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, is that the next faithful step for you? And the thing is that you'll find out that there's people that want to read it. I remember hearing somewhere, and I don't know who to give credit to, but I remember hearing, if there's something that you want out there, you either write the book or look around because somebody wrote it already, you know? And so I believe that's, I know so many people that want to write a book, and I think this is a word for you. So catch that, okay? This may be the next faithful step for you. So I'm glad that you wrote it, because again, I believe that this is a book that I wish I would have had when I was, younger. So many, even my friends that are like in their 50s and 60s, they're still asking themselves, did I do the right thing? Am I in the right place? Did I hear God right? Or I've heard friends tell me, I give up. You know what? It is what it is. This is what I am. And they don't necessarily feel fulfilled because they feel like in their mind, they never really got that, sky opening moment, angel visiting moment, something waking you up at night saying, this is what you need to do. So, I'm hoping that, again, if that's you and you're watching and you've been troubled with, in your mind, like, is this something that I'm supposed to be doing? I just want you to put all the things that you've learned aside and pick up the book. Because I think actually what we have to do is unlearn some things. We have perpetuated some terrible theology out there. And I think this will be a really big help for you. So if that's you, make sure you pick it up. So I appreciated, Dr. Maros, you referencing Paul Hibert's framing of naive realist and critical realist. Can you share a little bit about that, and how it was helpful in writing this book? Because I was like, oh, I never heard that before. He's a missiologist, and I care about missiology. And I was like, oh, I need to pick up a book about this guy. So definitely share a little bit more about that for our listening audience.
Well, so a critical realist and naive realist. So here's the notion is this, that there is reality, think of it as a capital R, and that a naive realist says, my reality is reality. So my little r equals big R. So what I see is reality, is the absolute. And a critical realist says, yeah, my reality is a piece of capital R, or it's a perspective on. See, so God is the only one who really has a full sense of reality, really, really knows reality. I can't see all of it. I see the piece that I see. And in part, I use the notion of Hibert's notion of critical realist and naive realist, in part because sometimes when I'm talking about experience and social location, one of the criticism, not necessarily criticism, I don't want to use that word, one of the concerns that people express is, well, are you getting into relativism? Are you just saying kind of anything goes? Are you getting away from the foundation of truth in scripture? And it's like, no, because the relativist says there is only the little r. There is only my perspective. There is no capital R. I'm advocating for being a critical realist, saying my perspective is a piece of, is a perspective on, is a viewpoint, view from a point of that bigger reality. And if we can have that sort of fundamental cultural humility, that's a term I'm learning from my psychologist colleagues, this cultural humility to say, I have a piece and it's legitimate, it's valid, it's significant, it's important, it's meaningful, but it's only a piece. It's a piece.
Yeah, I think if that was practiced more, we probably wouldn't see half the things that we've seen in the last few years, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important distinction and term that I hope that we get. Our reality is just a piece. It's not the whole reality, and the only one that actually knows all reality is God. So maybe that will help us to not get into arguments so much, and not try to defend something that again may be a reality for us because of our social location, but not necessarily a reality for someone else. So that I thought that was a really great point that you put in your book as well. Now, I chuckled when you mentioned that you had some Pentecostal charismatic students, and I'm Pentecostal, and I grew up Pentecostal, and you said that the students that were from that tradition, they expected to have like this vivid experience of like direct communication with God.
Yep.
And so, and listen, I am there. For many years, that's what I waited for. I expected that. Yes, I did expect the letter in the mail or the open sky or something that was like directly to me. In many cases, a lot of times, a Pentecostal charismatic kids would go to retreats or conferences, and we were like, Lord, speak to me, speak to me, give me a word. Yes, we were chasing the word, and then, and a lot of people got strayed away from crazy things because they listened to those words that were not of God. So share with us how that particular experience and other education moments led you to think about the importance of social location when it's related to vocational formation.
Yeah. Well, this was God's way of really getting me into social location, I think. Right.
Okay.
I saw the importance of social location first in terms of theological background. I mentioned J. Robert Clinton, Bobby Clinton earlier, right? And so he had his content, and I was using a lot of his content, his theories, his ideas in class, and there was always this gap, and then I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I'd have people do exercises using his materials, and they'd be like, "Wow, that's just so encouraging! It's so great to see God at work in my life." Okay, now what's my call? And his expectation was you do these exercises and it just makes it all clear. And my students' experience was, wow, that's really encouraging, but I still don't know. And what it came down to, what I realized in the process of, teaching for a long time and then doing my doctoral research, was that my students as Pentecostals, this clearly receiving a word from God was so central to their theological environment, right? It's part of their framework of understanding who God is and how God engages with people in the world. Whereas Bobby Clinton, coming from a more reformed context, had a lot greater emphasis on God's sovereignty and God's quiet providential work. My Pentecostal students didn't have a theology of providence. Like for them, theology of providence is what lazy Christians do because they don't bother to hear from God. You're not listening, so you're not hearing directly from God. So you're just having to see God in ordinary circumstances of life because you're not paying attention. They'd have that kind of attitude. And so this incredible desire to know, I need to know. Meanwhile, interestingly enough, and I don't know if this is true in your context, but at least for my students, there was also something of a suspicion of people claiming to hear from God, right? Because they had seen those abuses, right? They'd seen where, no, that wasn't actually God, or somebody was using God's name to play for their own desires, or, there were a lot of other things going on. It's been abused. God's name's been abused. There's been spiritual abuse or whatever it is. So they were, it was really surprising to me when I got into my doctoral research, how skeptical my respondents were about people saying they heard from God when they're a bunch of Pentecostals who want to hear from God, and this really, I saw how much being our theology, our lenses, our assumptions about the nature of the world, it forms this box that through which like lenses, like glasses, that we're looking at the world and we're interpreting our experience. And this is what calling is this box, and anything outside this box, God could be doing fabulous things outside the box and we don't see it because this is our theology and so it has to be an angelic visitation or a prophetic word, or it has to be, somebody coming up to you and saying, who doesn't know you and saying, whatever, all the things that we kind of expect as Pentecostal. I have to open up the Bible and the word leaps out at me, or whatever the things that we expect. And so there's an inability to see outside other kinds of things that God does that are equally God at work, because there was this set of context-shaped assumptions that were forming blinders through which people were looking at their experience. That got me thinking about how common that is, that really all sorts of experiences and all sorts of contexts shape our assumptions. We need them, actually. So I got into cognitive anthropology and how our mental models are formed, and all this kind of thing, and we need them to survive, because we have millions of inputs at all times, and we can't process that much stuff. So our brain needs these shortcuts. But the downside of them is that we go into a situation and we bring the assumptions with us, and so we don't see things that are in front of us to see. And so it was the theological content that was the gateway for me into really thinking more deeply about social location in other senses. So that got me thinking about racial, ethnic, cultural identity, and socioeconomic status, and gendered identity. And then the further I kept going, and it's like, oh, ability is something too. And what about neuronormativity? And wow, there are a lot of ways in which I have a set of experiences, and I bring those as lenses to interpret my experience. And maybe there are things I'm missing that God is doing that are outside the box.
I agree so much. I mean, I think, because you mentioned, like, a lot of these kids, and, I know I was one of them, and I know a whole bunch of people the same, that were like, reading the books. I mean, we bought the books on, calling and this and that, and hearing from God. Because it was like, I don't think I really heard from God the way that Nancy heard from God. So let me read a book about that, and then, yes, being suspicious, because, like, wait a minute. Then that's where we would do the judging part. Like, I know I'm much more holier than Nancy, so I don't know how she heard from God and I didn't, So that came a whole set of other issues when it came to exploring calling and everything. But it did create also this fear culture, like fear of missing out, fear of missing, that particular assignment. Like, like I don't want to miss an event, because that's the event where God may speak to me. So it was like I had to be at every event, and I had to be as soon as the church opened, I had to be there. And so, and a lot of people got into that habit of being in places just because they didn't want to miss it. And at the end of the day, I mean, everybody wants purpose, right? Everybody wants a reason to wake up, and we are told, especially in certain circles, that you're really, you can't do anything until you know what this is, and then from there you live happily ever after. And unfortunately, still to this day, and that's why I'm hoping that people pick up the book, because there's still people to this day that are sad, even because they feel like they have not heard from God, or they never knew their calling, so they've kind of functioned on a default, because they never heard from their God. So it's a horrible feeling. And also, you also mentioned about certainty, right? And I had read this book a while ago about the sin of certainty, and of course, in the Pentecostal circles, we certain about everything. So like they'll argue with us. We know, all right. And of course, it takes awareness, knowledge, unlearning some things for us to know that no, we don't know everything. And there's a lot of things that we thought were certain that was really interpretation. And so, and that's a whole nother theological conversation. But I believe that if anybody's watching this again and you have felt like that there, you're walking around and you're feeling aimless, I really hope that you pick up the book. Again, the book is called Calling in Context, Social Location and Vocational Formation, because there's no reason for you to continue to live under the guise of, there's no way that you can function in life if you don't have this call or whatever, because a lot of the things that God has already been doing in your life is already showing you where you should be flowing and growing. So you also mentioned, Dr. Maros, in your book about how we develop as people in this journey, and that there's various stages that we have. And I love the fact that you mentioned midlife. Thank you very much. I love that you mentioned the elder years. Thank you very much, because I feel that in this whole life of ministry, a lot of times people put midlife and elders out to pasture when they still have so much to give, But can you share a little bit about the stages that you mentioned in your book, and those development phases for people that are listening today?
Sure. Well, I started with, I keep mentioning Bobby Clinton, but I started with his lifelong development, right? And so he had some observations about the stages of development, starting with the foundational years of your life, that God is sovereignly at work, establishing some things. And I think sometimes we focus on, say, the first 20 years or so of a person's life. Like, we have this stereotypical view, you're supposed to grow up in church, and then you come to faith early, and then sometime in your teen years you're at camp, and the speaker says, for anybody who God has called you to the ministry, come forward, and then that's what you're supposed to do, right? That we have that super stereotypical church kid kind of thing.
You were there at that same retreat? No.
I know. And except that it doesn't fit people. Right? It only fits a certain sliver, not to mention which, right? That it in some circumstances it's very limited to. You're called to the ministry if you're the boy, but if you're the teenage girl, you're called to marry the boy who's right. So there's all these limitations that can get placed on. Oh, this is not for you. But that God is at work in those early stages. I've often had students who come to faith in their adult years, and they have the sense of, I have all these wasted years. It's nothing. God can't do anything with that. God wasn't there. I wasn't responsive to God. I was totally in rebellion, whatever. And it's like, well, hang on. No, God was still there. God was still there. And that doesn't mean everything. There can be stuff that is damaging and you can still carry the scars from, and yet God was forming you.
Nothing's wasted.
Nothing is wasted. Not a thing. Nothing that we turn over to God is wasted. That God's redemptive creativity can grasp it all. So we have these early years, and that's what we tend to focus on. And then somehow there's supposed to be this pivot, and the thing you're supposed to do, and then you go out and you do that for the next, till God calls you home. And that's the stereotype. But what about, I drew in both from Dr. Clinton's work, but also like Erik Erikson's work on adult stages of development, which is a psychology theory. I drew from a variety of insights that people have had as they look at human formation across a lifetime, and realize, there's ways in which all of these are engaged in our calling formation too, in our vocational journey. So you got your 20-something maybe that you're exploring things. And one of the pieces of advice I'll often give to 20-somethings who are like, well, so what should I do? I don't know. Do something. Like, try it. Do stuff.
Right.
Well, how do I know if I'm called to it? You'll find out along the way. That if you sit on the sideline and go, I can't say yes to anything until I know that's what I'm called to, you're going to stand on the sideline. That's where you're going to stay. So maybe try stuff. Just do it, and you'll discover along the way, oh, I love that. Oh, I hate that. Oh, people are really responsive to that. Oh, I encountered God there. Oh, and then God wasn't so much there. So try stuff. Our 30s tend to be real go-go doing. For those of us who have children, we may be busy doing that, or we're maybe building a career, or at least working. We're working hard to put a roof over our head, food on the table, and the stereotypical view is often focuses on the pastor or the missionary, right? Starts. We tell the story. It started a church and it was 12 people in my living room, and now it's 20,000 people, and it's like, well, okay. And is calling limited to that? I don't think so. But there are things we're learning to do, and discovering our capacities and discovering space, doing stuff. I think we come to in our 40s and 50s. It depends, but from person to person. But I have observed for an awful lot of people, there can be a pretty significant transition. Where you come to somewhere around 40 or 50 or so, somewhere in there, of kind of like, oh, it's not when I grow up, I'll have the life. This is the life. Like, this is the life I have. What do I?
Yep.
This is it. What do I do with this? And And even people who have been very fruitful and had lovely, built churches and had ministry and, led people to the Lord and wrote books and whatever, did all kinds of stuff, still have a kind of midlife reassessment. It can be triggered also by changes in our life, children growing up, changes, deaths or illness or changes in financial status or different things that come along that kind of rattle us a little bit. But it also can be exhaustion, which I see a lot of, where 20s and 30s is like, we're doing, and then we get into our 40s and 50s and our bodies are like, nah, I'm tired. Like, no.
Right.
And then it's, okay. I think maybe not everybody, but at least some people I notice have this sense of, well, I'm just not, similar to what you mentioned, well, I guess this is it, and I just never, I missed it. And somehow I'm not going to have the life I dreamed of. And there's sort of a reckoning, except that I think it's God's invitation into the wilderness. And we, particularly as Pentecostals, we look for the, the pillar of fire and the angelic visitation and we look for the drama, but go read your Bible sometime and look at all the references to wilderness, right? All the time, God calls people into the wilderness. And there's something about the inward refining that is about our calling, very much so, because it's about God forming us as people. And at least certainly in my case, and I've seen it with other people, it's a holy unraveling, breaking us away from the drivenness to perform, to do, to accomplish, to be seen. Are we willing to go to the wall and allow God to unravel that? Because there's an even deeper stepping into God's calling that comes on the other side of that when we're willing to go with God in the wilderness.
Yeah, I think of like the seasons as well, especially for women, we have kids, we transition in jobs, if we, if we're married, we usually, will decide, okay, I mean, and in our household, we talk about everything and we're like, okay, who's going to do this, who's going to do that? But in some households, that's not even a discussion. It's like, you're going to stay home and you're going to do this. But I also think about, like you were mentioning, like the rush, that culture of production that we're told, we have to, continuously put out, stuff and to be significant. And so we have this mindset that if I'm not, and I think and growing up, it was the pastor track. If you're not a pastor, then you really ain't really contributing to the kingdom at all. That's like the elevated position. Everything else is nice. Oh, it's so cute, but it's the pastor. So, and of course, women usually weren't considered, to be part of that path until recently, and even still, we're debating that in some circles. So I find it that, we have to have that moment where we're reflecting, and I saw that happening when the pandemic happened. The beginning of the pandemic, it was like everybody slowed down because we had to. I feel like that was the only way everybody was gonna just relax, right? Because here we are, global pandemic, nobody knows what's gonna happen tomorrow, and then all of a sudden, two things happened. We shut down, we slowed down, and then two, everything that was most important to us came to the top. Like this is what I'm going to spend time with. And of course, even now they're talking about the Great Resignation, whether it's in the secular world, with the marketplace, or whether it's ministry, everybody's talking about the Great Resignation and how people are, I don't want to say coming out, because we're still in the pandemic, people are still getting COVID. So, but in this, I don't know, world that we live in where we coexist with COVID, there's people that are like going back to that production culture. And that I need to perform and everything like that, because that's what they feel is part of their call. You know what I mean? So I'm just hoping that people will be able to, again, pick up the book, read, reflect, do more reflection, because really it's in those moments, like you said, in the wilderness, it's when you are spending time with God alone, when you don't even know what your next step is going to be, that you sit down and ask God, not just in one sitting, people, okay? This is a few times in your lifetime, okay? That you're just like, Lord, guide me. I think that's the best thing. And to know that you don't have to prove anything to anybody. It's you and God. So I love that you mentioned that. And again, for people to kind of be able to slow down and understand that this is a journey, and it doesn't stop until we take our last breath.
That's right. That's right.
So what are we rushing about, people? What are we rushing? Let's enjoy the moments with our loved ones. Let's be present with the people that we care about, and do the things that we take joy in. An example that you mentioned earlier about some people, again, I told about this pastor track and everything, and we just like, okay, if it's not this, then what do I do? And my boss, she doesn't like us to call her boss. She likes to call her teammate, but she's a very humble woman, and she felt that way growing up. She also grew up Pentecostal, and she knew young, I'm not called to the pastorate. So what does that mean? Does that mean that I can't contribute to the kingdom? And what ended up happening through her evolution and through her journey is that she said, I want to work with the Latino community and provide resources for them that they don't even know how to get for themselves. And then she developed this company that's been around for 20 years, employs 700 people, and growing. So I'm glad that she didn't fall into that trap of it's pastor or bust.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm thankful for that. And again, I want to encourage everyone that's out there. If that has been you, that you felt like, you have to be in ministry in order to really contribute, I don't know. Look, throw that out. Throw it out. You don't. You already know that there's some gifts that you have and some things that you love to do. Let's tap into some of those things. I bet you're going to find something that you would love to do, but don't put God in a box. He didn't put you in a box. So you mentioned also, and with this we'll come to the end of the end. You mentioned also in your book about the gift of particularity and socioeconomic status and class. And I was like, the gift, in so many ways, so many people tell us that it's not a gift.
Yeah.
So I was like, yes, I was receiving all of it. I was like, yes, thank you so much. It is a gift. It is a gift. But sometimes, and it goes back to that poem that your student mentioned earlier. Sometimes those very particularities are the things that people pick on to tell us that we're not enough, that we're different, that we don't belong. And for you to say, that's a gift. What took you there, and help other people in a short or amount of time, however you can put a little nugget to it. I know it's like a big chapter, but how can you help others to see that as well? Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, well, it's at least my hope. My hope is that, that conversation about the gift of particularity will help to set a bigger table, right? Instead of, you have to be like me, or if I don't require you to be like me, somehow that's invalidating me. And it's like, can we have and instead of or? So can we recognize that a creative God created a diversity of people, and recognize that the diversity of cultures and languages and peoples, the ethnos, the ethnicities of the world are God's creation that God retains in eternity. And that there's something about that, that's not the only particularity, but that's that chapter, The Gift of Particularity, focuses on racial, ethnic, cultural identity. And I have other social location identifiers that other chapters look at, but that there's something distinctive, that the image of God that we bear collectively, we reflect aspects of God's nature and character. And if we don't have the diversity, we don't have anywhere near the whole of who God is. We need the particularities and the diversities of the people of the world, because each of us brings something, to the collective,
Yes.
to the collective table. This is the ultimate luncheon, that we're sitting down, where each of us brings our distinctive dish, and there's something that I kind of wondered, is the wedding feast of the Lamb going to have all of our, the grandma's, whatever the thing is, that grandma made, that was the thing,
Right.
but that even now, I know God better and know God more because I live in community with people who are not like myself. And I bring my distinctiveness and they bring their distinctiveness. And that yes, we live in a season and an era where there's a lot of conversation. There's, my students will try to say, aren't we supposed to be colorblind? It's like, I don't think so. Because what colorblind says is, I'm going to make your particularity undiscussable. I'm going to make
invisible.
my particularity is going to be the norm, and your particularity is going to be invisible. Yeah. And instead, I think God sees the whole, and that we need to, because that is reflective of who God is, what God's like, what God cares about in the world. That without that, we're just, please, do we want Wonder Bread and Jiffy peanut butter? Not, I'm not picking on Wonder Bread. Maybe that's somebody's favorite thing.
That is my favorite.
But do we want to eat the one sandwich for all eternity?
Exactly.
I don't think so. We need
sometimes we want Philly cheesesteak, and
because
I get
there's something else that reflects nourishment and goodness and fellowship and family and belongingness and being together and expressing being people of God in the world. And we need all of our particularities to do that.
Absolutely. I envision it like, we're looking through like a kaleidoscope, and you see all those beautiful colors and everything, like to even imagine a world without difference in color and all the different things that people bring. Oh my goodness, it's so boring. I see heaven as one big giant party where we're all going to be so happy that we're there and celebrating with the Father, and being able to be like, oye, ¿cómo está? And everybody else is going to be, sharing from their own things. And like you said, I'm bringing the pastelón and somebody's bringing something else, all the good things that our cultures and ethnicities contribute to the world. That's what we're going to see. And I say, if we can't get used to that now, why would you even think that you were going to be okay in heaven, right? So I love that part, and I agree with you that it is a gift. And I hope that more people are able to see that in themselves. And this is a question that I always ask my guests as well, is what is your hope for this book and its impact individually for people and organizationally? And again, the book is Calling in Context, Social Location and Vocational Formation.
Well, I hope individually that maybe the book is helpful for people to be affirmed and validated in their particularities, and to recognize maybe a new and a fresh, and appreciate a new and a fresh. God's fingerprints are all over my life, and they're distinctive, and to really own that I don't have to, there's not a model of a called person looks like this and I have to match it. I'm distinctively called in the distinctive ways that God has created me. So I'm hoping the book will help that happen. I would love if the book would help us to have conversations where we could listen and honor and respect, and for people, particularly people like me, for I come from a conservative white evangelical background. And so I'm hoping my conservative white evangelical brothers and sisters might be willing to read this book. I don't know if they will, but I'm hoping, and that it might invite them. And that's part of the reason why I tell the story that I start with Ariana, is like, hey, I've been before you. I know this is a disruptive, disorienting journey for those of us who have been the majority culture, the dominant culture folks. And we live in a world where it feels like, for some folks, feels like things are crumbling and unpredictable and scary and dangerous and all of these things. And I want to invite us into a view of the world that says, hey, you know what, Revelation 21, there is this city into which all the nations bring all their wealth. And that's not the GDP of national governments. That is the wealth of the peoples. And that maybe God is already in this, and letting go and being disoriented. Maybe I can free fall in faith that God is already out there ahead of me doing something. And I'm being invited as a child of God into a deeper, richer, more complex understanding of God's nature and character.
Amen. Yeah. I mean, and this kind of disruption is holy. You know, it's an invitation for God and the Spirit to work in our lives so that we can have this conversation. And I'm hoping that pastors that are watching use this book in discipleship, because again, this is a great thing to be discussing with people that are just coming to the Lord. You know, that's when they start hearing about calling and preachings, and nobody bothers to explain it to them. So I think this is a perfect book for that. So, and one more thing, Dr. Maros, for those that are listening today, or those that are listening later, what is that one word that you would have for them if they're kind of like still like, what is calling? What am I supposed to do now?
I think the word that I can be a little Pentecostal, right?
Yes,
the word that's on my heart is to say, your Creator knows you. If your heart is for God, there is absolutely no way, it's not possible for you to miss living into God's purposes. If your heart is for God. Now, if you're stubborn and rebellious and you know, we can resist God, sure. Yeah. But if your heart is generally for God, God has your address. You may not hear God how you expect or want, but God knows how to talk to you, and God knows how to get to you. And if you're, maybe you need to trust that God is already there, already working. You are already, Ephesians 2:10, you are already God's masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that God prepared in advance. Before you were even born, God said, I'm inviting you as my child, as my daughter, as my son to participate in the family business. And so God is already at work. Can you trust that your Creator knows you and can be at work with you? So therefore, it's not, oh, but I don't see the big picture. No. What is the next faithful step? If you get up and to the best of your ability tomorrow morning, you are faithful as you can be, obedient as you can be, you're not going to miss God's purposes. You're not going to miss God's call in your life.
Amen. Amen. Thank you for that. I think that's so important. And again, remember, guys, you know, you are God's masterpiece. There's nothing that takes him by surprise, and he prepared you in advance. I want to remind everyone again that the book is called Calling in Context, Social Location, and Vocational Formation. IVP is offering this now at 30% off. All you have to do is go to ivppress.com, put in justice in the code, and you will get the book 30% off and free shipping. Again, guys, this code will be available until August 9th. So thank you so much again for tuning in. Remember to share, remember to like, to love. If there's a comment that you listen to later that you want to comment on our Facebook page, on our YouTube page, go ahead and do it. I'll make sure to tag Dr. Maros so she can actually answer anything for you. So God bless you. Thank you so much, Dr. Maros. Thank you for being with us today. God bless you guys. And remember, you are God's masterpiece. God bless.
Amen.